Okay, so this panel is spotlight on Indonesia. So Screen Singapore's country of focus this year is Indonesia, and it's approaching Goldilocks formula of having the right demographics, budding digital and brick and mortar infrastructure, as well as a maturing audience and filmmaking base. So I like to put it out to you guys. Sorry, I should just introduce Ifa, you're a filmmaker.
Yes, Indonesian filmmaker.
Wonderful. Krishnan, you are, what are you? You're a multi-hyphenate.
Aspiring filmmaker, let's just say.
Krishnan put together the financing and as a co-founder for Hook, and Whacked Out Media is a production company, or is it a...
It is also a production studio. It's one of the largest multi-platform networks in India.
Okay, wonderful.
So it's a combination of a studio which has a ton of digital rights and acquires movies. Okay. But we also have a direct-to-consumer presence. We do about 1.5 billion views a month. We manage about 200 celebrities. We have the rights to about 7,000 movies. And it's an Indian company focusing on Indian regional content. Okay. But I have a separate production arm that's looking at producing movies in Indonesia with partners like IFA.
Wonderful. And Hendy, you are Vice President at Indonesia Entertainment Group. Maybe explain a bit more about what you guys do.
Yeah, we are more about the distribution. So Indonesia Entertainment Group is the subsidiary of MTech Group. So this is the sub-holding company within the group actually that do all the distribution and the acquisitions of the content.
Okay. So let me open up the first question to you. What does Goldilocks formula really mean to you guys right now? I mean, in terms of, say, demographics, maybe you can talk.
Sure. I mean, I think we saw this a lot when I was at Hook as well, and I think it's kind of common knowledge now that Indonesia is, at least film in Indonesia is through a whole period of resurgence, right? There was sort of a lost decade, if you will, in the early 2000s, and now you can really see all the signals. And you talked about all the signals, right? Screens are growing, economy is growing, millennials more westernized, looking for better content fare. Film industry doing very well. I think box office growing dramatically over the past few years with no signs of slowing. I think it's a perfect opportunity for content creators to start experimenting and entering genres that historically haven't been addressed in Indonesian cinema. It's been very sort of flat in terms of, and possibly because the market was kind of low over the past decade, that I think it's been a de-risking business. So content creators focus on a few genres that Indonesian cinema is known for now, so horror, comedy, etc. And I think now is a perfect time, and we are starting to see a lot of projects even this past year with Critical 11 and Sweet 20 and Marlena and a whole bunch of others, starting to really explore different genres and grow the landscape. So I think it's a perfect time to enter, to do something that's new, different, invest in better stories, better scripts, better production values, and I think the rewards are there. I think the consumers are ready for it and in fact demanding it.
What's your ARPU for Hook right now? I'm not going to ask you that. No, it's proprietary information. Well, Hendy, maybe you can then, since your company does mainly B2B content distribution, talk a bit more about how the marketplace has changed in the last 10 years. I mean, from what Krishnan says, complete doldrums in the 2000s.
Yes, correct. I think Krishnan pointed it very well. When we look at the early 2000s, for example, or probably late 90s, there were times when the movies in Indonesia, in terms of the number of production, very low, and those being produced are, well, maybe not all, but the majority are very cheap, sexy, half-porn horror, So this is the kind of dark ages, so-called, when the market has become very bad. But nowadays, things have changed very dramatically. If you go to the cinema, whenever a certain production house launches a very big movie, and you go to the cinema, the cinema operators, they will kick out all the major titles And
You
then
mean like Hollywood titles?
yes, the major Hollywood titles, they will change all the schedule to this local, which is a good news. And nowadays, it is no surprise if we see the box office will outperform the box office of local production outperform the Hollywood studios, the major studios. It is not a big surprise for us nowadays.
Well, that would be very good news for you, Ifa, as a local filmmaker.
Yeah, it's good news, but it's also have like an effect, yeah, because yeah, it's like Krishan said. Actually, in Indonesia now is the cinema industry is growing up, yeah, but we still have some of obstacles, some of problem because now we have like a very limited I can say like a human resource. Like human resource is like is the number of the production is a huge now in.
Does anyone have a number for how many films are being made in Indonesia?
Yeah, it's like for next year we already have more than 120 submitted to the cinema.
Wow.
Actually, we have like a currently we have one. Okay, I try to share about the big picture of Indonesian cinema industry now. It's like we have a number of the screen. The last that I know is like 1,150 something. It's a huge, but Indonesia is like big country.
No, but I mean, it's still incredibly under-screened.
Under-screened.
In Indonesia.
Yeah,
right now.
so the
And I
screen
think we'll come to talk about cinema later as well, but please carry on.
Yeah. So actually, the cinema is growing up, but we still have, because the number of the production is huge, but it's difficult to search the very good quality human resource. It's like then producer or scriptwriter.
So you're saying right now it's a little bit akin to, say, maybe Hong Kong in the late 80s, early 90s, and China in the mid 2000s, where like if you're a good cinematographer, even if you're a mediocre cinematographer, you are never short of work. You're constantly working. Is that right? Is that what's the case for crew and talent as well?
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm interested in the fact that local content, like you said, can beat out foreign content. I remember, Hendy, last night when we were talking, you mentioned that as a content distributor, it's quite hard to penetrate the local market with foreign content.
Correct. Especially when you talk about television market, for example.
Right. Which you run 2 free-to-air channels.
Yes, we do run 2 free-to-air channels. For TV is extremely challenging, actually, I should say, for the foreign content to penetrate Indonesia. The regulation from the government, if I'm not mistaken, is actually we have to play 80% of local content in the TV station. Wow. But in reality, all the TV stations, they play like somewhere around 95 to even 100% of local content. Yes. So the government don't have to force us to do so because the rating explains itself.
So what kind of content then do you have in your library? I mean, did you previously have
majority
foreign
what
content?
works is still on TV, drama series works really well.
Right.
The theatrical movies, when it is released on the TV, works really well. It will go hand in hand with the box office, of course.
Right.
If the box office is good and performance on the TV is very good, and TV pay actually very good money. And
Sorry, can you unpack that a bit more? What do you mean by TV pays?
The rights for the theatrical movie, for the TV rights.
And this is Indonesia only, love, yes?
Yes. And so drama series, theatrical movies, the TV movies, the reality shows works really well. Yeah, and almost all of them are local.
All right. What about singing competitions? Very big.
Yes, it's very huge. It's very huge. In Indonesia, our competitor had Indonesian Idol, which performed really well. Yeah. In our case and our group, we have a dangdut competition. I don't know if many of you knows dangdut. So this is
Dunhill.
Dangdut is a very typical
dangdut,
Indonesian music. We have a show called Dangdut Academy. So it's a singing competition. Now it's already into the 3rd season. It's called Dangdut Academy Asia. So we have contestants from Indonesia, from Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and some other countries. So they're all performing singing dangdut. Some people may not believe it, but actually per episode, the duration live show, the duration lasted like 5 hours, sometimes 6 hours.
You know, honestly, I'm not surprised, especially in Asia. You have Voice of China, which goes on for like 2 days. It's like a cricket match, you know, it's crazy.
Yes.
Okay.
So we do it like that, and then it also it's also very popular in the neighboring countries. Like when we air the show in Malaysia, it performed really well. You know, in Singapore, it also performed really well for the Malay communities. But somehow they air it only like 1 hour or 2 hours. So we asked them to try to give it a try to do it like 4 or 5 hours. For them, it's very difficult to accept. You know, like one show could be like 4 or 5 hours. But once they try, then well, the result show is that.
Okay, I'm kind of curious about this. How do you measure the success, though? I mean, do you have rating systems like
Of
TNS
course.
and that kind
Nielsen,
of thing?
yes, we have Nielsen.
Oh, okay, Nelson. Okay, well, that's actually something that segues into maybe something that both you, Hendy, you and Krishnan can shed some light on, which is revenue. Where does these things come from? I'll read out what Mark Britt, who's the CEO of iFlix, he said a couple of months ago. He said, many consumers don't have bank accounts. They don't have access to credit. Some even don't have ID. So, there's often no history of subscription. So, how do you educate? You know, how do you generate revenue from these very, very tough consumers?
So let me let me take a shot at that. I think that is a very specific digital perspective, and for a subscription business, I think taking a step back, the larger opportunity is very real, right? I think on one hand, I think you have the theatrical market, which for filmmakers is still the number one area of focus, right? If you think about the best sort of the most successful Indonesian movie of all time, I think is World Cup last year. It was about 7 million audience, right? And
6.8 million tickets sold, which is nuts.
Seven
which is crazy,
yeah. For a country the size of 300 million people, right? So it barely sort of scratches the surface, right? It's got the lowest ratio, if you think about it, of population, tickets to population, right? And so there's a huge growth opportunity here just in theatrical, and that's consumers open their wallets for theatrical experiences, right? And a lot of the theatrical landscape today is very centered around sort of the urban centers, and also it's priced for urban centers, right? Tickets are around 50,000 rupiah, which is not something that rural audiences, which is where a lot of Indonesia sits today in terms of population, can afford. So there's actually a lot of investment, as I understand, in screens to rural audiences, and then theatrical revenue, box office tickets will be priced accordingly. We'll price at $1 instead of $3.50. We price at 75 cents, and it completely explodes that opportunity, right? So I think that's one view of revenue, which is I think there's a ton of upside for theatrical, for movies, right? Because there's also, as Hendy pointed out, a very healthy second source of revenue, which is pay TV free-to-air rights, and there's a healthy third source of revenue, which is the OTT players, right? Now, how the OTT players make money is their problem. It used to be my problem. It's not anymore. But I think if you look at it from a creator perspective, it's actually all signals are positive, right? There's no slowing down of revenue. There's massive growth opportunities. And going back to what Aoife said, I think what's going to happen is a disruption in terms of the quality. This is my belief, right? Because if you make 125 movies, of which 100 movies are made for under $100,000, right? Those movies will not survive.
Okay.
Right? So there's going to be a consolidation of efforts because, you don't see the returns, right? So 80% of the movies don't make their money back, right? That statistic is still very real to content creators because they don't invest enough, right? I mean, they put in, they make do with what they have. Funding is kind of scarce. The treatment's not great. Stories are not great. They just push product out, right? And they don't get the return, but they continue to do it again, right? They find another investor and they go ahead and so that cycle, I think, will break because what's going to happen, I believe, is audiences are going to reward good films, which means everyone's going to step up and elevate the conversations. Budgets have to rise, production values have to rise, stories have to rise. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 125 dropped to 60 movies with thrice the budget each, right? In a period of 2 years, right? Because that's going to happen, and that's only going to elevate revenue again, right? So I think, from my perspective, I think The revenue is, in fact, it's a very positive signal, right? I mean, there may be specific constituents in the ecosystem who are struggling for money, but I think from a content creator perspective, it's a very positive environment.
But I mean, from your point of view, you're saying that it's still taking a while for, say, the big screens to go into the small cities or small villages, small towns.
Yeah.
But the time is right for your small screen, Hook, to get there first, to capture that.
Well, I mean, I think
Those
it's no
guys.
longer mine. It used to be.
So I keep going back to Hook because you have that kind
I know.
of.
So I can talk about it, but
Yeah.
I don't represent them anymore.
Okay.
There is an opportunity, but I think, a film experience cannot be replicated on the mobile phone, right? If you think
Does
about,
it matter for? I mean, I'm not trying to be classist here, but an unsophisticated audience. Does it matter?
Oh, it absolutely does, because I think they are very family-centric, right? Even when I was at Hook, we never said we are going to disrupt theatrical. In fact, a lot of our content, the story was the theatrical audience and the penetration would take it to the top 10% of the market. There was the unserviced 90%, all of whom had smartphones and had mobile connectivity on a growing scale. And so we would bring it to them later, 3 months, 4 months later, on a subscription basis that was included with a mobile plan, right? So that is still an opportunity, right? Because even if you go from the top 3% of the audience to 10% for theatrical, that's a 300% growth potential. There's plenty to be had there. And the OTT guys will pick it up and take it down to the bottom 90%, right? So as you pointed out, people need to invest in screens in rural areas. And that's never going to happen as fast as mobile penetration, right? But it's nevertheless a positive signal because in both cases we win as content creators, right? If the small screen grows, right, you get more theatrical revenue. The OTT players are not disrupting theatrical. They don't want to. They want theatrical actually creates awareness of the product, right? Because when you market a title for theatrical, you're going out there, you're creating digital signals, you're creating awareness, and it actually feeds into the OTT cycle because when they talk about the product, they don't have, people already know there's a movie called X or Y, right? So I don't think it in any way disrupts or conflicts. The story is very aligned. OTT is growing. It's growing faster than the number of screens for sure. But I think the opportunity in screens is very real, right?
Ifa, did you want to say something about that? I could see you're trying to
No. Yeah, because of course, from the view of the filmmakers, is
because it seems to me that as an independent filmmaker, so your films are not necessarily targeted towards
The
mainstream
problem for
audience.
independent filmmaker is but we have like the same point. But the most important is the quality because if the most problem is we start with the idea, we start to make the good quality film, but when it's meets, we talk about distribution is always we talk about number. So that's the most problem because independent film is the numbers is not good.
Right.
Yeah, but of course this is like a good opportunity, but in some part. So we need the person that's really have same vision in the cinema. It's not just the number, but it is the most important is how to create the culture of the cinema.
Right, culture of cinema. I was planning to end this panel with talking about cinemas because I thought everyone's from apart from you, maybe more from a TV point of view, but everyone wants to talk about cinemas, so we'll talk about cinemas. Okay, big elephant in the room. So Jokowi came in and said, let's clear all this regulation, and now the Koreans have come in with a vengeance. And we've seen $260 million investment from Singapore's government investment corporation into the Century 21 group, right? Yep. You guys, the two of you, you're not in cinemas yet, are you?
Well, I'm not particularly I don't position myself as a cinema person, but yes, I do distribute a lot of titles, including the theatrical release titles.
Yeah. So why aren't you guys building the screens now?
That's a good question. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about the history. So for so many years, Indonesia only have one network of cinema, which is 21. okay, for so many, many years. And this is, of course, this is excluding the very small, small independent cinema in the rural area. This one doesn't count. Okay, but the so-called national chain network is only one for so many years, for decades actually, until Blitz came in with the investment, but somehow they also could not fight the giant. So they got an investment from CGV. So this is the moment when the government changed the regulation because in the past, the cinema business is prohibited for foreign investors. And when it was allowed, it was only like 20% or something. But now they already changed the regulation, so well, CGV can openly say that they are the majority or even 100% of the investors. So it's good. And then after that, the last few years, Lipo came up with the network, and they grow very fast. The key point to answer your question is actually the ownership of the cinema nowadays will be so much different compared to in the past. In the past, 21 built all the networks organically. So they ran the place, or they built an independent venue, so they just built it. Nowadays, to own a chain, I think it's about the same like in Singapore. You gotta be strong in property.
Okay.
You
So
gotta be
it's still a
strong
real
in
estate
property.
business.
Yes, this is what happening. The Lipo Group, the Cinemax, in all the malls that they have, they do not extend the contract for 21. Okay, so the space for 21, they don't want to extend the contract, so they change with their own cinema called Cinemax.
Right.
So this is the key success indicator when it comes to this kind of game. You gotta be strong in the property first.
Right. But I mean, IEG is a big. It's part of a big conglomerate.
Yes.
Though. So, isn't there then that space? I mean, I can get it if, say, it's not easy to for an.
Yeah, but we are not a property company.
Okay. Right. Wonderful. Okay. So we've talked about revenue from users. We've talked about cinemas. What about brands? What about marketing? What about using that as a driver for production revenue, or money for production?
So I'll take a stab at it. I think Ifal probably has a lot to say about this as well. I think brands clearly have a role to play in terms of sort of a source of revenue. I think there's multiple models that are well known: product placement, sponsorships, marketing, co-marketing, post-production before theatrical release, etc. It's growing, obviously. I think there's lots of brands that want to get out to audiences, and movies are a good way to get to that. But I think it's almost a sort of afterthought, right? It's another source of revenue. It may subsidize 5 to 10% of your production budget if you're lucky, right? And it's not something that's reliable because there's no guarantees that you're going to get it for every project. And on a project by project basis, you sort of evaluate that. But I think the key here is not to get carried away and turn every movie into one big advertising brand, right? So this happens when you get over enthusiastic about sponsorship. When you commit to 2 or 3 different companies and they start asking for, use this phone all the time and do this and do that, and suddenly you have creative integrity being challenged by the brands, right? And I think so it's almost like you want to go the other way, right? You want to start with the creative, right? And this goes back to what is the core, right?
Right.
The core is a good story, good storytelling, good treatment, good handling, good production, right? If you focus on that, I think the brands will come, right? And it's a problem you face when you're ready to distribute, right? Or when you're ready to release it. And I think the mistake that maybe some filmmakers may rush into is to get the sponsorship revenue up front because it de-risks their investment, and then basically kill the creative by introducing all these false scenarios. Guys in a village, next thing you know, he's running a Land Rover because, it's that kind of thing happens more often than you think. So I think that's kind of the balance, at least my perspective, is just focus on the creative, focus on the story. Everything else will sort itself out, right? Because the market's very dynamic, it's very intelligent. All the brand guys are very smart. They understand good content when they see it, and they'll want to be associated with good content, right? So my advice, and this is what I've been telling everyone, is just focus on the core. Just focus on getting the right story, the right production value, and don't worry about anything else. The rest will sort itself out.
Okay. Ifa? I mean, do you have a lot of opportunities to put brands into your films? Do you even want to? Does it help with your fundraising?
Yeah, for my case, not at all. I mean, I produce a very local film, low budget film, and there is sometimes is no space to
Right.
need a brand. But yeah, in the case of in Indonesian cinema now, some producer doing that, and then yeah, it's works. I think it works really well because that's as like Christian said, that's the audience is we have it's just not that many film that have good audience. So sometimes the producer think that before the film go to the cinema, the revenue is must be break even point first, and then some of them like doing like they put like one step after. Usually we have like a development, pre-production, and then after the development, they use like call like packaging to make the marketing team like working during pre-production.
Right.
So when they did production, they already know about the brand in that film.
Right.
So now we have the film like I can say the title is like philosophy copy or wonderful life, Naura, the children, especially the children film. There is so many brand, and I think they can cover the production.
Okay. I mean, I suppose there's a different ethical argument and discussion to be made about constantly advertising to children in children's films.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's probably a subject for another time.
Sorry, maybe I could
Yeah,
add
please,
something
please,
about
please.
the sponsorship thing. This is very interesting. I could share some development actually. First of all, when it comes to movies, if it is a big movies, of course they will be more than happy to come in, the sponsors, yeah, in terms of the built-in. But really depends on the genre, depends on the cast, of course, depends on the genre. Because of course, I think most of the product may not want to be associated with horror, for example. Okay, that's for the cinema case. The interesting part is actually this is a trend that has happened for the last 1 year or so. For our drama series, there has been a lot of built-in sponsorship in the form of the digital built-in.
What do you mean by that?
Okay, so in the past, when you talk about built-in, when there is a scene when we talk to each other, then we will put the bottle here, Coke.
Right.
Okay. Nowadays, we don't do that one anymore because sponsors sometimes they come in the very last minute, in the very, very last minute. Sometimes even like only a few days before it is being aired when the production already finished. So what we do is actually we do digital built-in. So when they do the shooting, the background is a billboard. We just change the billboard. The
So
picture
it's probably a
of the
green
billboard.
screen billboard instead of anything.
Yes. Yeah, actually it's a real billboard. It's a real billboard, but where we kind of green screen the part of the billboard. So it requires a lot of hard work from the editing side, but the money is good, so it's worth it.
I was going to say, you're practically killing your VFX and your editing guys.
Yes. So there are a lot of complications in this. So we only edit all the materials when it is being aired on the free-to-air, because that's the interest of the advertisers. But when I monetize this content, for example, I sell this to Malaysia, we cannot do that. My buyers will complain. So we gotta have the clean version, the original version.
Right. Actually, I just wonder, in terms of like a future sort of revenue stream, right? For all you know, you could automate this process, send out the video, and then literally it's clicks per impressions. If you're watching on a screen, sometimes you get Coke, sometimes you get Pepsi, sometimes you get whatever it is. A thought for anyone who's running a VFX company could be something worthwhile doing. I want to give more time to the audience to ask questions. But one last thing I want to ask is this: it seems to me that this new renaissance in filmmaking obviously owes a lot to the fact that there's a lot of money coming into building cinemas and building new screens, which also comes from the fact that Jokowi removed all these regulations. Is there anything any government regulation still surviving now that you think needs to be taken care of? needs to be gone rid of?
I believe so.
What, like what?
I believe so. I mean, I just read this morning actually the Indonesian ease of investment rank.
Right.
It used to be 106, and Jokowi clear all the regulation, simplify everything. Now we are ranked 72, so 106 to 72. So it's quite a significant jump. 34 rank. Okay, but 72 compared to our neighboring countries like Singapore, Malaysia, still nothing. Still nothing. So we, as the people on the field, the people who do the business, if you ask me, do we feel any improvement? Maybe yes, but is it enough? The answer is no. The answer is no. I think the bureaucracy, the process, the speed is still an issue. Of course, we have to appreciate the improvement, but I feel it still needs improvement.
Well, practically, how does that affect? I mean, on a day-to-day basis, you say the bureaucracy, the speed.
Permits, cost, and especially the thing that I complain the most to the government officials is about the tax. The tax is very, very ridiculous and unreasonable.
What is the tax now?
For example, Indonesia have a tax treaty with Hong Kong. Okay, if we buy something from Hong Kong, the tax is 5%.
Right.
But if I buy a movie from IFA, my tax is 15%.
A local film.
Yes.
Okay.
This is
So you're
ridiculous.
penalizing local purchase of local content.
Correct. So what happened is some people, not us, some people kind of engineer a little bit, okay, but it's not healthy.
So you mean that what they sell to a Hong Kong company and then sell it back to you to?
One of the thing, but a lot of we are very creative at that. But you know, this is one of the issue. This is one tax for the licensing, for the acquisition. Another tax if you bring in some production tools from abroad, or if you do this, or if you do that, or if you get the sponsorship, you know, all sorts of tax, very, very headache. And when you, for example, import programs also, from foreign program, a lot of tax also. So when I buy something from Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 10%. So my question is, how can you, if you want to encourage the usage of the local content, how can you tax me higher when I buy from local producer compared to when I buy to foreign producers?
Obviously that makes no sense. Is there a reason? Is it just
I think that
old
this has
tax
been
systems
going
that-
since very, very, very long time, since the Suharto era, if I'm not mistaken. But nobody seems scared to change this kind of thing.
And I presume also, you know, for the cinema industry, it's maybe quite low down on the scale of priorities.
Okay, now when you talk about cinema, when I distribute my movies to the cinema, okay, when I buy, I already get a tax, okay, which is like 15%, the withholding tax, plus the VAT, 10%. And when I sell to the cinema, I distribute revenue share with the cinema. When cinema wants to pay, they want to pay me, there will be tax. The income tax, withholding tax, and the local entertainment tax, which is different from every province.
And how much is the LET now? The local entertainment tax?
Depending on the province. So the local entertainment tax belongs to the local district government, the provincial government.
Oh my God.
So different province, different rate. I think, but the rate will be like 5 to 15%.
Right.
Depends on which province.
It's almost a third. I think if you look at all the cost factors, I think the government gets roughly a third of all the theatrical revenue.
It's very painful.
The screens get, another third, and the producer, if they're lucky, gets a third, right? And the third that they get is subject to withholding as well. But I think it's, I think my perspective is slightly different, having seen other markets like India, which have had very high entertainment tax historically and have been cleaning up, so to speak. I think it's not necessarily an immediate sort of hurdle, if you will. It's more of sort of you got to look at the economics of the planning, and you got to factor that in when you build a business case for a project, etc. I think the bigger, for me, as someone who's entering Indonesia in the creative space now, it's more the lack of clarity around what's there, right? I think you talk to 4 different accounting firms or 4 different law firms, they come up with 4 different versions of reality, right? So it's like they all look at the same regulations, which are, I think, not necessarily very clear. And so there's a lot of gray in terms of interpretation, which adds to risk. Right? To me, actually, it's not. I mean, there is, of course, hopefully, sort of a movement around, simplifying the tax regime and things like that. But I think the bigger need of the hour for foreign investors is really having some real clarity around what is the IP regulation, right? What is the tax regulation in a way that's a single page that you look at it and everybody agrees, and you don't have risk when you enter the market. There's repatriation is not an issue. You put your money in, but it can't come out. That's a problem, right? So I think those high-level hygiene factors, I think, sort of exist because there are people who have done it, but it's not clear, right? So you go in with a lot of uncertainty. You go in with some hedges. You kind of say, what if this happens? It's plan B if it doesn't work, plan C, and here's how we have to game it to get our money out, etc. I think that part of it is a more real sort of requirement, I think, in some ways.
Okay. Well, Ifa, did you want to finish up?
Yeah, I agree with that. The tax is the really a problem in.
How does that affect you as the producer, the ultimate producer of the film? How does that affect you as the ultimate producer of the film?
Yeah,
Because they're talking about the chain
He
down the
needs
line.
to pay tax when he pay the talent.
Yeah, everything is tax. Everything is tax.
Wow.
In everything is tax. We rent the equipment, we got tax, everything. So I agree that's the problem. But for me, the most biggest and the most problem for me, it's for Indonesia is like archiving. Because
Archiving.
yeah, because so many good film now growing up, so many talents there, but I'm not sure that I can see that film in next 10 years, 20, 50 years. So that's, government must do something about that archiving.
I mean, of course, archiving, again, is a story for another panel, but it's a huge issue all around the world. No one can figure out a stable storage mechanism for that matter. Okay, thank you. We are going to open this up to questions from the floor. Who has questions? Anyone? Yes, the lady in front, please.
Hi, panels. My name is Charlene. I'm from Yahoo Media Solutions in Australia. We are going to starting produce a film, and then because currently I'm trying to collect some ideas and also just try to get some knowledge about how to become the first-time producer. So I believe you guys will be the best one for me to ask that question, particularly to Krishnan. You mentioned about the when you create a content and IP, and try not to think too much about branding, like promoting the different brand. Try to create something that's what you're passionate about, something that you think audience will like, and then the sponsorship will come later. Every productions company, what they really want, I believe, at the end is revenue. So in what stages or toward how many percentage in terms of stages you start asking for sponsorship, and how do you put the branding in tight together, and so you can earn more money, so to speak?
I mean, I think there's no answer here that's clear and sort of, because everyone has a personal risk appetite, and I think different people, the smaller producers who are putting in their life savings into the project, and understandably they want to de-risk right away, and so it's not really sort of, there's no single answer. I think it really depends on the risk profile and so forth. The point I was trying to make really is around, don't compromise stories, right? The belief has to be in the story, right? The right story will win, right? And I think if you start compromising the storyline, the production, the treatment, because you're worried about some revenue, or you want to bend backwards because this one guy is willing to de-risk a little, I think that may work for a project, but it won't work systematically, right? So I think if you think about it as a slate and you say, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to be doing it for the next 10 years, and I'm going to have certain guiding principles for how I invest in film, then I'm saying just focus on the right stories, right? And the way you evaluate, I think, is, again, that becomes the secret sauce, right? Because you sort of look at, and Ifa and I have had some conversations, and he'll tell you, the first thing I ask him is, okay, what's your target demographic, right? Who are you going after, right? Who's your audience? Put yourself in the mind of the consumer. Who's going to watch this movie? Why are they going to watch it? How are they going to feel about it, right? And then you sort of, behind the scenes, you don't have to ask the creators to do that, but you can model, right? Okay, I think I can get X amount of box office audience because the demographic that there's appeals to, and so forth. There's a lot of data that I think can come to bear. But that becomes kind of a different, that's the secret sauce, right? Every investor, so to speak, will have to build some capabilities around assessment. And the ones who do it well will invest in the right projects and so forth, right? So I think, at least my philosophy, if I ever end up doing something in Indonesia, and I'm certainly sort of planning to, is not to worry about the revenue, right? In the early stages, right? Is to worry on getting the right team, the right talent, make sure the directors, you believe in the director, you believe in the story, you believe in the production, you look at the budget, it looks reasonable, you kind of get a sense of the demographic, you say, okay, I think it'll make money, and you start the project, and then, of course, you go searching sponsors, but you have a story at that point, right? Because you know who your demographic, you know what your pitch is to your sponsors, right? As opposed to saying, oh, I'm making a movie, I have some green screen space here, fill it in. Whatever you want, we'll fill it in. Don't worry, just to give me the money, right? So it's just a different philosophical approach to the problem, right? But nevertheless, I think I'll be the first to say we will, of course, at the right point, seek sponsorships and so forth as well. But to me, at least, it comes later in the game. It comes when you're closer, when you have during post, when you have product that you can kind of show, and you have an exact sense for who this is going to appeal to, and therefore you get the right brands, and you do it in a non-intrusive way. You know, you do it maybe digitally as opposed to doing it on the film itself. I mean, there's lots of different ways to play the game.
So do you mean that sometimes the sponsorship will come halfway and then ask you to change the story just because
No
they
way.
put money?
No, that's
Or is
the wrong sponsor, right? I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it at all. I think it's the wrong thing to do. But again, it's a risk appetite thing, right? If you're playing with your own money and it's your life savings, then you'll probably say yes, right? And it's completely understandable, right? If you're playing with sort of a larger corpus of capital and you want to focus on the story and the integrity and the long-term, production values and your brand, so to speak, as a studio, then you probably can walk away and say, it's okay, I'll take the hit on this one, but I really need to establish my brand and market, right? So I think it really is a one-off. There's no answers here, right? Everyone has to make their own call around this.
I'm sure. I mean, again, so basically, if the sponsor says, I want this in, and you really don't feel like it, trust your gut. We've got a question over there.
Yeah. This is to the gentleman to the left of
Hendy.
Krishnan, I think. Hendy, yeah. Hendy, the question is that I've invested into a slate of films which are international. They're not Indonesian. They're in animation, but. So, two questions. One is, what is the kind of valuation that we can consider if we look at all rights, when we go into investment situations in films? And the other is, in the short term, is the outlook positive for going into international animated feature films with good storytelling but independence?
Okay, the first one, if I understand correctly, you are asking about the valuation of a project, or are you asking about?
If we have to put an all rights dollar value.
So the licensing fee.
Yeah, all rights.
Okay, it really depends on the title. I cannot say a certain number.
I would say independent with good storytelling.
I know.
Yeah.
I've been buying independent animation, independent series, independent movies. The range would be like, for example, for Indonesian, all rights, it could go as low as 3, 4, 500, all rights,
This
5
is US
years.
dollars.
Yes, could go as low as that, up to as high as 2, 3, 4,000 for free to air rights only.
Wait, and what kind of content is this? Is this
Animation,
film, feature,
a series.
series? Right?
Yep. And we are talking about per half an hour basis. If it is really, really successful, a certain Malaysian product really successful there, they don't really buy actually. The producers don't want to sell. They do revenue share from the advertising. So it really depends on your content. That's the answer.
Yeah, it's going to be quite hard to give a dollar figure when you've sight unseen anything really.
Yeah.
Can I say something completely different? I think to channel Monty Python, right? So I think the answer here is, I think content is valued for project basis, right? The content has to work, right? There's no such thing as, I mean, certainly as a buyer in the past, we never sort of looked at it as apples and oranges. I think it was a very specific assessment of a given IP and how it works. The larger opportunity, one of the big white space opportunities in Indonesia is local kids animation, right? There is, as I can recall, there's only one, Adit Sopo Jorbo, that has actually made it in terms of as a brand. And in India, you have like, Green Gold doing work like Chota Beam and there's other brands that are coming up. But in Indonesia, it's completely starved, right? There's just one particular IP that's doing well, that's local IP, and all other efforts have really not taken off, right? So, in fact, I would say if you're looking at white space opportunities, that is actually the single biggest untapped opportunity in Indonesia is domestic, locally produced, good quality kids animation.
Right.
And it's something that, as far as I can tell, no one's really investing in anymore, right?
So, again, people with money, take care. Put that in whatever Krishnan says. I trust him. All right, time is up. Thank you all so much for listening to us. Thank you all panelists. Thank you very much. Stay for the next one.